"Stop!" the billionaire whispered, his hand trembling above the plate. The restaurant froze. Crystal glasses stilled midair. A waitress stood there silent, knowing she had just broken every rule that protected her job. He stared at the plain white dish as if it were a wound torn open. No gold, no art, no performance, only memory. What no one saw, what he hadn't realized yet, was that this moment wasn't humiliating him. It was about to strip his power bare. In a room built to impress wealth, a woman with nothing but instinct had already won. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence that descended upon the Sterling Rose, one of Manhattan's most prestigious dining establishments, was absolute. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across white tablecloths as servers froze mid-step, their silver trays suspended in air. The sommelier's hand trembled over a bottle of 1947 Chateau d'Yquem. Even the soft jazz quartet in the corner let their notes fade into nothing. All eyes turned to Table 7, where a man in an impeccably tailored Seville rose suit sat, motionless, tears streaming down his weathered face as he stared at a simple plate of food. Sheikh Rahman al-Hashimi was not a man who cried. Not in boardrooms where billion-dollar deals hung in the balance. Not at galas where celebrities and politicians vied for his attention. Not even 2 years ago, when he'd stood at his mother's grave in the small village outside Riyadh where he'd been born. But here in this moment, as he looked down at the meal before him, something inside the 45-year-old billionaire shattered and mended all at once. The young waitress who had served him stood a respectful distance away, her hands clasped in front of her simple black apron, unsure if she'd made a terrible mistake or done something right. She had no idea that this single moment would change both their lives forever. Rahman al-Hashimi's story didn't begin in the marble towers of Dubai or the exclusive clubs of London. It began in a 2-room house with cracked walls and a tin roof where his mother Amina would cook over a single burner, transforming humble ingredients into meals that fed not just the body, but the soul. She had a way of presenting even the simplest dish, rice and lentils, flatbread and yogurt, that made it feel like a feast prepared for royalty. "It's not what you serve, Habibi," she would tell young Rahman as he watched her arrange herbs with the precision of an artist. "It's how you serve it. Food given with love tastes different than food served with indifference." He'd carried those words with him through his meteoric rise in the tech industry. At 17, he'd won a scholarship to MIT. By 25, he'd developed an algorithm that revolutionized supply chain logistics. By 30, he was a billionaire. By 40, his company had contracts with governments and corporations across 6 continents. He had everything. Private jets, estates on 3 continents, a yacht that had once belonged to a Greek shipping magnate. Everything except the one thing money couldn't buy. The warmth he'd felt sitting at his mother's table. Amina had passed suddenly 3 years ago, just weeks before Rahman had planned to bring her to America to live in the mansion he'd built. He'd been in Singapore closing a deal when the call came. By the time his jet landed in Riyadh, it was too late. The funeral had been simple as she would have wanted, but the grief was anything but simple. In the months that followed, Rahman found himself unable to taste food. Oh, he could distinguish flavors, the umami of aged beef, the delicate notes of a perfectly prepared fish, but nothing satisfied. He ate at the world's finest restaurants, hired Michelin-starred chefs for his homes, but every meal felt hollow. He realized what he was missing wasn't cuisine. It was the care, the intentionality, the love his mother had put into every meal. That's when the search began. 2 years ago, Rahman had embarked on what his assistant called an unusual project. He would visit restaurants not to enjoy them, but to test them. He started in Dubai, then Paris, then Tokyo. He sampled from Michelin 3 stars and hole-in-the-wall establishments. Everywhere he went, he ordered simple food and watched how it was presented. The pattern was always the same. The moment staff learned who he was, and they always learned the presentation, became a performance. Gold leaf garnishes edible flowers arranged like works of art plates that cost more than most families' monthly rent, everything designed to impress, nothing designed to comfort. They don't understand he would tell his closest confidant and business partner James Morrison during their weekly video calls, "I'm not looking for extravagance. I'm looking for what my mother gave me. Warmth." James, who had known Rahman since their MIT days, understood. Maybe you're looking in the wrong places. Maybe you need somewhere less aware of who you are. Which is how 500 restaurants later, Rahman al-Hashimi found himself walking into the Sterling Rose on a quiet Tuesday evening in Manhattan, using a reservation under James's name, wearing a suit that was expensive but not ostentatious, with no bodyguards, no assistant, no fanfare, just a tired man looking for something he'd lost. He had no idea that tonight his search would finally end. He had no idea that a 26-year-old waitress named Layla Chen would see past his expensive watch and tailored suit to recognize something no one else had noticed in 500 attempts. The profound sadness of someone who had everything except what mattered most. Layla Chen had never planned to be a waitress. 6 years ago, she'd been a promising culinary student at the Culinary Institute of America, dreaming of opening her own restaurant that would blend her Chinese heritage with the American comfort food she'd grown up eating in Queens. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Her father's stroke came during her junior year. Suddenly, she was the sole provider for her parents and her younger brother Marcus, who was still in high school. The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses for a family of 4. She'd taken a leave of absence that became permanent when the medical bills started piling up. The restaurant dream went into a box labeled "Someday" tucked away in the back of her mind, alongside other casualties of responsibility. Now at 26, she worked at the Sterling Rose 5 nights a week and at a bakery in Brooklyn 3 mornings a week. It wasn't what she'd envisioned, but it kept the lights on in the small apartment she shared with her family. Her father had regained some mobility. Her mother worked part-time at a dry cleaner, and Marcus was thriving as a sophomore at City College. They were making it work. The Sterling Rose wasn't just any restaurant. Nestled in a converted brownstone in the West Village, it had earned its Michelin star through executive chef Thomas Whitmore's innovative approach to new American cuisine. The dining room was elegant without being pretentious exposed brick walls, fresh flowers on every table, and soft lighting that made everyone look beautiful. The clientele ranged from celebrities seeking privacy to Wall Street executives celebrating deals to couples marking anniversaries. Ila had been working there for 2 years, and she'd learned to read people. She could spot a first date from across the room, the nervous energy, the extra attention to appearance. She knew which tables would be generous tippers and which would complain regardless of service quality. She understood that some people came for the food, some for the ambiance, and some simply to be seen at a Michelin-starred establishment. But she'd never encountered anyone quite like the man who walked in that Tuesday evening. He was in his mid-40s, she estimated, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that seemed to carry a deep weariness. His suit was clearly expensive. She'd worked at the Sterling Rose long enough to recognize bespoke tailoring, but he wore it with the casualness of someone who'd forgotten to be impressed by luxury. Most notably, he was alone, which was unusual for a Tuesday evening when most tables were occupied by couples or small groups. The maître Gerald had seated him at table 7, a quiet corner table that offered privacy without isolation. Illa watched from the service station as the man declined the wine list with a polite shake of his head and barely glanced at the menu Gerald presented. "Table 7 is yours," whispered Mararian, the senior server who'd been at the Sterling Rose since it opened. "First-timer reservation under Morrison. Ordered a simple meal. The roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables. No appetizer, no wine, just still water. Odd for this place, but Gerald says to give him excellent service regardless." Isla nodded, gathering her notepad and approaching the table with her practiced smile. But as she drew closer, something made her pause. The man wasn't looking at his phone like most solo diners. He wasn't reading a book or reviewing papers. He was simply sitting hands folded on the table, staring at nothing in particular with an expression that Illa recognized all too well. It was the same expression her father had worn in the hospital after his stroke when the doctors said he might never walk again. The same look her mother had when she'd had to sell her grandmother's jade bracelet to pay rent. It was the face of someone who had lost something irreplaceable and didn't know how to find their way back. "Good evening," Cyrilla said softly, arriving at the table. "Welcome to the Sterling Rose. My name is Illa, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The man looked up, and for just a moment his eyes met hers. There was something in that glance, a flicker of hope mixed with resignation, as if he'd been searching for something for so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. "Thank you," he said, his accent placing him from somewhere in the Middle East, but softened by years of international living. "I understand the roasted chicken is recommended." "It's excellent," Layla confirmed. "Chef Whitmore sources the birds from a farm upstate. They're raised humanely, and the flavor is exceptional. He serves it with root vegetables and fresh herbs." Rahman nodded slowly. "That sounds appropriate." There was something in the way he said that word, appropriate, not delicious or wonderful, as if he was fulfilling an obligation rather than anticipating a pleasure. Illa had served thousands of customers, but this man intrigued her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I'll put that order in for you right away," she said. But as she turned to leave, she found herself hesitating. In the kitchen, Chef Thomas Whitmore was in his element, orchestrating the evening service with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Flames leaped from pans, knives flashed against cutting boards, and the air was thick with the aromas of rosemary, garlic, and caramelizing butter. The Sterling Rose's kitchen was his domain, and every plate that left it bore his exacting standards. Order and Illa called out, clipping her ticket to the line. 1 roasted chicken, table 7. Guest is dining alone, seems to prefer simplicity. Thomas glanced at the ticket, then at Illa with a slight frown. "Just the chicken. No wine pairing, no appetizer, just the chicken, and still water." Illa confirmed. The chef shrugged. "Here's loss. I'll make sure it's perfect anyway." He turned to his sous chef. Marcus prepped the Heritage Farm chicken. Classical preparation, nothing fancy. Sometimes simple is what speaks loudest. Illa returned to the dining room, making her rounds to other tables. She refreshed water glasses, checked on a couple celebrating their anniversary at table 3, and answered questions about the evening's specials. But her attention kept drifting back to table 7, where the man sat in quiet contemplation, occasionally glancing around the room with an expression that seemed almost analytical. She'd seen that look before. She realized health inspectors wore it. Mystery shoppers wore it. People evaluating something rather than experiencing it. But there was something different here. Beneath the assessment, there was longing. 20 minutes later, the kitchen bell chimed. Table 7 up called the expediter. Illa approached the pass, where a beautiful plate awaited. The chicken was golden brown and glistening, surrounded by roasted root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, and fingerling potatoes, all artfully arranged. Microgreens and edible flowers formed a delicate crown on top, and the plate itself was one of the Sterling Rose's signature pieces, a handcrafted ceramic work that cost $200. It was perfect. It was beautiful. It was exactly what the Sterling Rose was known for. But as Illa looked at it, something her father had once told her echoed in her mind. Before his stroke, David Chen had owned a small Chinese restaurant in Flushing. It hadn't been fancy, but people came from all over Queens for his cooking. "The best meals," he'd said, "aren't the ones that impress the eye, they're the ones that touch the heart." She thought about the man at table 7, about the sadness in his eyes, about the way he'd said appropriate instead of wonderful, about how someone with clearly enough money to dine anywhere had chosen a simple roasted chicken. This wasn't what he needed. Illa stood at the pass for a long moment, staring at the beautiful plate. Behind her, the dining room hummed with the quiet conversations of satisfied diners. Before her, the kitchen staff moved with practiced efficiency, and somewhere in between those two worlds, Layla Chen made a decision that would either get her fired or change everything. "Chef," she said quietly, turning to Thomas, "can I ask you something?" Thomas looked up from the sea bass he was plating. What is it, Layla? Table seven's order is getting cold. She took a breath. What if... what if we served this differently? The chef's eyebrow arched. Differently? How simpler, more personal. She struggled to find the words. I know this sounds strange, but I don't think this presentation is right for this guest. I think it's too much. Thomas set down his spatula, his full attention now on Ila. In 2 years, she'd never questioned a plate. She was one of his most reliable servers, efficient professional, never causing problems. Which is why, instead of dismissing her immediately, he asked, Explain the guest at table 7. Ila began choosing her words carefully. He's not here to be impressed. There's something he's looking for, and I don't think it's this. She gestured at the elaborate presentation. I think he needs something that feels like home. Thomas was silent for a moment. The kitchen noise seemed to fade into background static as he studied Ila's face. Finally, he spoke. You have 30 seconds to tell me what you want to do. Ila's heart raced. Let me replate it. Use one of the simple white dishes from the staff meal service. Remove the microgreens and edible flowers. Just the chicken, the vegetables, and fresh herbs parsley, or thyme whatever's in the garden box. Arranged simply like someone's mother would serve it. That's not how we do things here, Thomas said, but his tone wasn't dismissive. It was thoughtful. I know, Ila said, but I think it's what he needs. The kitchen fell silent. Even the line cooks had stopped to watch this unprecedented moment. In the history of the Sterling Rose, a server had never asked to change a chef's presentation. It simply wasn't done. Thomas looked at the elaborate plate, then at Leah, then back at the plate. His reputation had been built on presentations exactly like this one, but he'd also built it on reading his guests on understanding that great cooking was about more than technique. It was about connection. Do it, he said finally. But if this backfires, we're both having a very uncomfortable conversation with Gerald. Ila's hands trembled slightly as she worked at the prep station just outside the kitchen's main line. She'd requested one of the simple white ceramic plates they used for staff meals. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just a clean, honest vessel for food. The kind of plate that existed in kitchens around the world in homes where people gathered not to impress, but to nourish. Carefully, she transferred the roasted chicken from the ornate presentation plate. The bird was still perfectly cooked, the skin crackling and golden, the meat tender and fragrant. She arranged it on the center of the white plate with deliberate simplicity. No artistic angles or calculated positioning, just a chicken presented as it was. The root vegetables came next. Instead of the artful scatter that Chef Thomas had created, Ila placed them around the chicken in a natural circle, the way her mother used to arrange dishes for family dinners. Carrots here, parsnips there, the fingerling potatoes nestled alongside. She discarded the microgreens and edible flowers entirely. Then came the crucial element. She walked to the small herb garden that Chef Thomas maintained on the kitchen's windowsill, his one indulgence of bringing living things into his pristine domain. Fresh parsley and thyme grew in simple terracotta pots. Ila plucked several sprigs, their fragrance sharp and clean, and scattered them over the dish with the randomness of nature rather than the precision of art. The result was humble, honest, the kind of meal that might be served at a family table, anywhere in the world. It looked nothing like what the Sterling Rose was known for, and everything like what Ila's instincts told her this man needed. It's perfect, Chef Thomas said quietly, appearing beside her. Or it's a disaster. We'll know in about 60 seconds. Ila lifted the plate, feeling its weight in her hands. The warmth of the food radiated through the ceramic. She took a steadying breath and walked back into the dining room. The restaurant's ambient noise, the gentle clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the soft jazz quartet faded into background static as she approached table 7. Raman was staring out the window at the Manhattan street below, watching pedestrians hurry past in the November evening. He didn't notice her approach. Sir, Ila said softly, and he turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ila set the plate down in front of him, the simple white ceramic, a stark contrast to the elegant table setting. No flourish, No grand presentation, just a gentle placement of food before a guest. Rahman looked down at the plate. His expression didn't change immediately. He simply stared, his eyes moving from the chicken to the vegetables to the scattered fresh herbs. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling like an eternity to Illa, her heart hammered against her ribs. Had she made a terrible mistake? Had she projected her own experiences onto a stranger and gotten it completely wrong? Then she saw his hand begin to shake. It was subtle at first, just a slight tremor, as he reached toward the plate, then pulled back. His breathing changed, becoming deeper, more deliberate, as if he was trying to maintain control over emotions that were threatening to overwhelm him. Sir Illa asked, quietly concerned, "Is everything all right? If the presentation isn't to your liking, I can know." The word came out rough, almost broken. Rahman closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were glistening with unshed tears. "No, please, don't change anything." His hand finally reached the table, fingers spreading flat against the white cloth as if to steady himself. He stared at the simple plate of roasted chicken with fresh herbs as if it were the most precious thing he'd ever seen. Around them, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm. At table 3, the anniversary couple fed each other bites of chocolate torte. At table 9, a group of business colleagues laughed over after-dinner cognac. At the bar, a couple on their third date leaned close in conversation. But at table 7, time seemed to have stopped entirely. "How did you know?" Rahman asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at Illa, and the rawness in his expression made her own eyes prickle with tears. "How did you know this is what I needed?" Illa swallowed hard. I didn't know exactly. I just saw that you were looking for something, and this felt right." Rahman let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 500 restaurants, he said, more to himself than to her. 500, and this is the first one that understood. 500 restaurants, Illa repeated, confused. But Rahman wasn't listening. He was staring at the plate again, at the simple presentation that looked nothing like haute cuisine and everything like a meal served with love. His shoulders began to shake, and a single tear escaped, rolling down his cheek and disappearing into his perfectly trimmed beard. "This is how my mother used to serve food," he said, his voice cracking. "Not on expensive plates or with elaborate garnishes, just honest food given with care. She would pick herbs from the garden behind our house. We were poor. We had almost nothing, but she always picked fresh herbs. She said it was her way of showing love." Illa felt her own tears building. She glanced toward the kitchen, where she could see Chef Thomas watching through the pass, his usually stern face softened with something like wonder. "She's gone now." Rahman continued, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand, unconcerned with the other diners who were beginning to notice the emotional scene unfolding 3 years ago. "And I've been eating in the finest restaurants in the world, searching for something I couldn't name. I thought maybe if I found the perfect meal, the emptiness would go away. But it wasn't about the food. It was about this." He gestured at the simple plate, the care, the intention, the love. The silence that had fallen over the sterling rose was almost sacred. Conversations at nearby tables had ceased as diners became aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Even the jazz quartet had softened their playing to almost nothing, as if unwilling to intrude on the moment. Illa stood beside table 7, her professional training wearing with her human instinct. Protocol said she should give the guest privacy, step away, allow him to compose himself. But something deeper told her to stay, to bear witness to this man's grief and joy intertwined. "I'm sorry," Rahman said, finally looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "This must seem very strange to you, a grown man crying over a plate of chicken." "Not strange at all," Illa said softly, surprising herself with her honesty. "My father had a stroke 3 years ago. For months afterward, the only thing that seemed to comfort him was when my mother made his favorite dish, simple congee with preserved egg, the way his grandmother used to make it when he was a child. It wasn't about the food, it was about the memory, the love." Rahman's eyes widened slightly. "Your father is he. He's alive, recovering." It's been slow, but he's walking again, even working part-time. Ela felt her own tears threatening, but I understand what it's like to watch someone you love search for something they've lost. To see them trying to find their way back to a feeling they can't quite reach. What was her name? Rahman asked. Her name is Susan Chen. She's very much alive and probably worrying about me right now because I forgot to text her that I got to work safely. Ila smiled through her emotion. What was your mother's name, Amina? Rahman spoke the name with such tenderness it was like a prayer. Amina al-Hashimi. She raised me alone after my father died when I was 7. We had nothing. Lived in a small house with walls so thin you could hear the neighbors' conversations. But every meal she prepared was a feast. Not because of what was on the plate, but because of how she presented it. The care she took the fresh herbs from the garden, the simple white plates that had belonged to her mother. He reached out and touched the rim of the plate in front of him, his fingers gentle, reverent. This is exactly how she would have served this. And in 2 years of searching in over 500 restaurants across a dozen countries, you're the first person who understood what I was looking for. 500 restaurants. Layla repeated, the enormity of it sinking in. You've been searching for 2 years? Rahman nodded. I thought I was looking for perfect cuisine. The finest chefs, the most exclusive establishments. I told myself I was honoring her memory by experiencing the best food the world had to offer. But the truth is, I was looking for her for the feeling of being home. And the more expensive the restaurant, the further away I got from what I actually needed. Gerald the maitre appeared at a discreet distance, concern etched on his usually composed face. Ila caught his eye and gave a small shake of her head. Everything is fine. This is meant to be happening. He nodded and retreated, though she could see him watching with curiosity. Would you? Rahman hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from him. Would you sit with me just for a moment? I know this is highly irregular, and I don't want to get you in trouble with your management, but I would very much like to know the name of the person who just gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Ila glanced toward the kitchen. Through the pass, she could see Chef Thomas giving her a small nod of permission. This was unprecedented. Servers at the Sterling Rose didn't sit with guests, but then again, everything about this evening was unprecedented. Lila Chen, she said, pulling out the chair and sitting down. And you are Rahman al-Hashimi, he said, and waited for the recognition that usually came with his name. But Ila's expression remained merely polite and curious. She clearly had no idea who he was, no knowledge of his business empire, his wealth, his influence. To her, he was simply a man grieving his mother, searching for home. It was perhaps the most refreshing thing that had happened to him in years. It's very nice to meet you, Mr. al-Hashimi, Ila said. Rahman, please, he insisted. Mr. al-Hashimi was my father. Then you must call me Ila. She paused, watching as he finally picked up his fork and knife. Would you like to tell me about her? About your mother? And as Rahman cut into the perfectly roasted chicken, as the steam rose carrying the aroma of rosemary and thyme, he began to talk. He told her about growing up in a small village outside Riyadh, about Amina's determination to give him an education, despite their poverty, about the scholarship that took him to America, about building his company from nothing. He told her about the guilt he carried that he'd finally achieved the success to give his mother everything, but she died before he could. Ila listened occasionally, asking questions, but mostly just being present. Around them. The restaurant slowly came back to life. The jazz quartet resumed their set. Other diners returned to their conversations, but at table 7, a billionaire and a waitress sat together, united by loss and love, and the simple power of a meal served with care. What neither of them knew was that this moment, this simple act of understanding, was being witnessed by more than just the other restaurant patrons. At table 12, a food journalist from the New York Times had been dining incognito, reviewing the Sterling Rose for a feature article. Her camera phone was already out capturing the extraordinary scene. By tomorrow morning, the world would know what had happened here tonight. But for now, there was just this. Two people, a simple meal, and the bridging of a gulf that money could never cross. Rahman ate slowly, savouring each bite not for its culinary excellence, though it was excellent, but for what it represented. Each fork full of tender chicken, each roasted vegetable, each hint of fresh herb brought him closer to a memory he'd thought was lost forever. Illa had returned to her other tables, but she checked on him frequently each time with a genuine warmth that had nothing to do with the promise of a generous tip and everything to do with human connection. In the kitchen, word had spread among the staff about what had transpired. Line cooks who normally maintained laser focus on their stations kept glancing through the past toward table 7. Moran, the senior server, approached Illa at the service station with tears in her eyes. "In 15 years in this business," Moran said quietly, "I've never seen anything like that." "What you did? How did you know?" Illa shook her head, still somewhat overwhelmed by her own instincts. "I didn't know. I just felt like something was wrong with the original presentation, like we were answering a question he hadn't asked." "You risked your job," Marianne pointed out. "If that had gone badly, if he'd been insulted by the simplicity." "I know." Illa glanced back at table 7, where Rahman was setting down his fork, his plate clean. "But some risks are worth taking." Chef Thomas emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd removed his toque, a sign that the evening's main service was winding down. He approached Illa with an expression she'd never seen on his usually stern face, something like pride mixed with wonder. "That man just asked to speak with me," Thomas said. "Gerald is bringing him back to the kitchen in a moment. Illa, I want you there too." "Me? But chef, I'm still working my section." "Marianne can cover. This is important." Thomas's eyes held hers. "What you did tonight, it reminded me why I became a chef in the first place. Not to impress critics or earn stars, but to touch people, to create moments. You gave that man more than a meal. You gave him back a piece of his soul." Minutes later, Illa found herself standing in the kitchen as Rahman was guided through the swinging doors by Gerald. The billionaire looked around at the gleaming stainless steel, the organized chaos of the cooking line, the herbs growing in their windowsill garden. "Chef Whitmore," Rahman said, extending his hand. "That was the most meaningful meal I've eaten in 3 years. Thank you." Thomas shook his hand firmly. "The credit belongs to Lila. She's the one who insisted on changing the presentation." Rahman turned to Illa, and she saw that his eyes, though no longer actively crying, still held a sheen of emotion. "I would like to do something," he said. "If you'll permit me. I don't want to offend, but I'd like to express my gratitude in a tangible way." Lila felt her stomach tighten. She'd heard stories of wealthy patrons who showed their appreciation with extravagant tips, sometimes thousands of dollars. While her family could certainly use the money Marcus's tuition, her father's ongoing medical expenses, something about accepting it felt wrong. This hadn't been about money. "Mr. Al-Hashimi Rahman, you don't need to." "Please," he interrupted gently. "Let me explain what I'd like to propose. You mentioned you have a father who's recovering from a stroke. Medical expenses can be devastating. I'd like to help with those bills, all of them. Consider it not payment, but gratitude from someone who understands the value of family." Layla's breath caught. "I couldn't possibly accept." "Then don't think of it as accepting. Think of it as allowing me to honor my mother's memory. Amina would have done the same if she'd had the means. She always said that when you're blessed, you have a responsibility to bless others." He pulled a business card from his wallet. "This has my personal number. Think about it. No pressure, no strings attached. Just one person who's been shown kindness, wanting to return it." Before Layla could respond, Rahman turned to Chef Thomas. "And you, Chef? What you've created here is remarkable. Not just the food, though it's extraordinary, but the culture that allowed a server to break protocol because she felt it was right. That kind of environment is rare." Thomas nodded, accepting the compliment. "We try to remember that we're in the business of creating experiences, not just meals." "Would you consider consulting on a project I'm developing?" Rahman asked. I'm planning to open a foundation, a culinary school for underprivileged youth in the Middle East and North Africa. Students who have talent but lack resources. I'd like to create scholarships, provide training, help them achieve dreams they might not otherwise reach. Your expertise would be invaluable. Chef Thomas blinked clearly, caught off guard. That's incredibly generous. I'd be honored to discuss it. Excellent. Rahman smiled, the first genuine smile Ela had seen from him all evening. I'll have my assistant contact you to arrange a meeting. He turned back to Ela, and his expression softened even further. As for you, Miss Chen? Ela, I meant what I said about the medical bills, but I'd also like to offer you something else. You mentioned you studied at the Culinary Institute that you had to leave. Ela felt her heart begin to race. How much had she told him during their conversation? She'd been so focused on listening to his story that she hadn't realized how much of her own she'd shared. My foundation will need instructors, Rahman continued. People who understand not just technique, but heart, who know that the best meals aren't always the most elaborate ones. Would you consider being part of it? The position would come with the salary benefits and the opportunity to complete your degree if you choose. Your family could come with you, or the role could be structured to allow you to remain in New York, whatever works for your situation. Ela stood in the kitchen surrounded by stainless steel and the lingering aromas of the evening service, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Chef Thomas was staring at Rahman with barely concealed amazement. Gerald had retreated to a respectful distance, but was clearly listening to every word. And somewhere in her pocket, Rahman's business card felt like it was burning through the fabric. I don't understand, Ela said quietly. You don't even know me. How can you offer something like this based on one meal, one conversation? Rahman's expression was patient understanding, because in 2 years of searching in 500 restaurants staffed by thousands of people, you're the only one who saw what I needed instead of what I was. That kind of intuition, that empathy, it can't be taught. It can only be nurtured. And I believe it should be. This is too much, Layla whispered. I served you dinner, that's all. I was just doing my job. No, Rahman said firmly but kindly. You weren't just doing your job. Doing your job would have been bringing me the elaborate presentation without question. You did something far more difficult. You trusted your instincts even when they contradicted protocol. That takes courage. He paused. My mother had that same courage. She trusted her instincts about me, about my potential, even when everyone in our village said education was wasted on a poor boy. She was right. I'd like to think she'd be proud that I'm now in a position to help others the way strangers once helped me. Before I could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again and again. She pulled it out, frowning at the cascade of notifications flooding her screen. Text messages from friends she hadn't spoken to in months, social media alerts, news app, notifications, all arriving simultaneously in an overwhelming digital avalanche. What's happening? She murmured, scrolling through the chaos. Marianne burst through the kitchen doors, her phone held up like a torch. Lila, you're viral. You're actually viral. What are you talking about, the New York Times? Moran thrust her phone toward Ila. Jennifer Morrison was here tonight. She's their food critic. She posted about what happened. Ila took the phone with trembling hands. The article was brief, but powerful. Posted just 20 minutes ago to the Times website with a simple headline. 500 restaurants got it wrong. The moment a waitress understood what a billionaire needed. The piece described the scene at the Sterling Rose, a wealthy diner moved to tears by a simple presentation. A young waitress who'd risked protocol to serve with heart rather than spectacle. Jennifer Morrison had captured the moment in both words and a single perfectly composed photograph. Rahman at table 7, tears on his face, hands reaching toward a humble white plate of roasted chicken with fresh herbs. Oh my God, Ila breathed. It gets better, Marianne said, her excitement barely contained. Look at the shares. Look at the comments. The article had already been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from around the world. People sharing their own stories of meaningful meals, of moments when food transcended sustenance to become connection. The photograph had been picked up by major news outlets, aggregator sites, social media influencers. Within minutes, it was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Billionaire discovers money can't buy everything, read one trending tweet. This is what real hospitality looks like, proclaimed another. Finally, someone in the service industry who gets it added a third. Rahman pulled out his own phone, scrolling through what Illa assumed was a similar flood of notifications. His expression was woeful. I should have anticipated this. Jennifer Morrison is known for her unexpected pieces. I've been photographed in restaurants before, but never quite like this. Are you upset? Illa asked, worried. The last thing she wanted was for her actions to cause him embarrassment. Upset. Rahman looked genuinely surprised. Quite the opposite. This is perfect. This is exactly the message I've been trying to articulate for 2 years, but couldn't find the words for. He looked at his phone again, then at LeahQuest. Your name is there too. By morning, this will be everywhere. Gerald appeared at the kitchen doors, his usually imperturbable composure slightly ruffled. Chef, we have a situation. 3 news vans just pulled up outside. Reporters are asking for statements already. Thomas looked shocked. News travels fast in Manhattan. Gerald said dryly, particularly when it involves a billionaire having an emotional moment in a Michelin-starred restaurant. Illa felt panic rising in her chest. I can't talk to reporters. I don't know what to say. This is all happening too fast. Rahman stepped forward, his demeanor shifting subtly from emotional dinner guest to experienced executive. You don't have to say anything you're not comfortable with. But if I may offer some advice this moment, this story, it has power. It's resonating with people because it's authentic. Because it reminds them that in a world of excess and spectacle, sometimes the most meaningful gestures are the simplest ones. He turned to Chef Thomas. With your permission, I'd like to address the media. I can explain what happened here tonight in a way that respects both Illa's privacy and the Sterling Rose's reputation. Thomas nodded slowly. That would be appreciated, though. I suspect they'll want to hear from Illa as well. All eyes turned to her. Illa felt the weight of expectation of opportunity of a moment that was rapidly spinning beyond her control. Just hours ago, she'd been a waitress worried about making rent and covering her father's medication costs. Now she was at the center of a viral news story, being offered life-changing opportunities by a billionaire and facing a crowd of reporters eager for a soundbite. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother. Ma, what's going on? Your face is on the news. Illa stepped out of the Sterling Rose's kitchen into the private office Gerald had offered for phone calls. Her hands shook as she dialed her mother's number. Susan Chen answered on the first ring. Lila, what's happening? There are news reports about you and some billionaire and a plate of chicken. Your father is trying to read the article, but his hands are shaking so much I had to take the iPad away. Mom breathed. Illa interrupted gently. I'm okay. Everything's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. But I need to explain something to you and Dad. Is Marcus there too? He's right here. We're all right here. Baby, you're scaring us. Over the next 10 minutes, Illa told her family everything about the sad man at table 7, about her instinct to change the presentation about Rahman's reaction and his extraordinary offers. She told them about the viral article about the reporters gathering outside, about the choice she now faced to speak publicly about what had happened or to retreat into anonymity. What does your heart tell you? Her father asked, his voice still slightly slurred from the stroke, but growing stronger every month. Not your head, your heart. Illa closed her eyes, thinking, what did her heart tell her? That she'd done something right. That a simple act of empathy had touched someone deeply. That maybe, just maybe, this moment could mean something to other people too. Other servers who felt invisible. Other families struggling to make ends meet. Other people who'd forgotten that wealth and status mattered less than basic human kindness. My heart tells me that staying silent would be a waste of something important, she said finally. That Mom always taught me to use my voice when it matters. She heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, then a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Then you already know what to do, Miha. And whatever you decide, we're proud of you. 15 minutes later, Layla stood beside Rahman on the sidewalk outside the Sterling Rose. Gerald had arranged a small area for the impromptu press conference, and at least a dozen reporters had gathered, cameras, rolling microphones extended. Behind them, curious pedestrians slowed their pace phones out, adding to the digital documentation of this moment. Rahman spoke first, his voice calm and authoritative. My name is Rahman al-Hashimi. 2 years ago, I lost my mother Amina. In my grief, I began a search, one that took me to over 500 restaurants across 12 countries. I was looking for something I couldn't articulate, something money couldn't buy. Tonight, for the first time, someone understood what I needed. He turned to Ella, and the cameras swiveled to follow his gaze. This young woman saw past the expensive suit and the reservation and the expectations. She saw a person in pain, and instead of following protocol, instead of playing it safe, she trusted her instincts. She served a simple meal with care and intention, the way someone who loves you would. In doing so, she gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the feeling of being home. A reporter called out, Mr. al-Hashimi, reports say you're worth over $3 billion. How does a plate of chicken affect someone with your resources? Rahman's smile was sad but genuine, because wealth doesn't insulate you from loss. It doesn't bring back the people you love. It doesn't replace the meals shared at a family table. For 2 years I've been trying to fill a void with Michelin stars and rare vintages. Tonight I learned that what I actually needed was much simpler and far more precious. Another reporter turned to Illa. Miss Chen, what made you decide to change the presentation? Weren't you afraid of getting fired? Illa took a breath, remembering her father's question. What did her heart tell her? I was terrified, she admitted, and heard Rahman chuckle beside her. But I saw someone hurting, and I had an opportunity to maybe help. My father had a stroke 3 years ago. I watched him struggle to recover, watched him search for things that would make him feel like himself again. Sometimes it was the smallest gestures that mattered most. My mother making his favorite. My brother reading the sports section aloud because Dad's hands couldn't hold the paper yet. I recognized that same searching in Mr. al-Hashimi's eyes. So you risked your job for a stranger? I didn't think of it as risk, Illa said thoughtfully. I thought of it as seeing someone really seeing them, not just as a table number or a check total, but as a person with needs and hurts and history. Isn't that what hospitality is supposed to be about? Not just perfect technique, but genuine care. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Someone started clapping. Then others joined in. The reporters looked surprised, but several were nodding as they scribbled notes. What happens now? Another journalist called out. Will you accept Mr. al-Hashimi's offer? Ila glanced at Rahman, who gave her an encouraging nod. I don't know yet, she said honestly. These are big decisions that will affect my whole family. What I do know is that tonight reminded me why I wanted to work with food in the first place, not to impress people, but to nourish them body and soul. If I can do that, whether here at the Sterling Rose or somewhere else, then I'll have done something worthwhile. By the following morning, the story had exploded across every major news platform. The New York Times article had been picked up by CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and countless others. Social media was flooded with the hashtag #SimpleKindness, with millions sharing their own stories of meaningful moments in restaurants, hospitals, stores, anywhere. Service workers had gone beyond protocol to see the human being in front of them. Ayla woke to find her phone had died overnight from the constant notifications. When she plugged it in and turned it on, the flood resumed immediately. Interview requests from morning shows, messages from culinary schools offering scholarships, fellow service workers sharing stories of times they'd wanted to break protocol but hadn't dared, and hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of messages from people thanking her for reminding them what true hospitality meant. The Sterling Rose was experiencing its own transformation. Gerald called an emergency staff meeting that Wednesday morning, gathering everyone from line cooks to dishwashers in the dining room before service began. What happened Tuesday night? Gerald began, his formal demeanor softened by genuine emotion, has changed this restaurant. We've received over 200 reservation requests in the past 12 hours. Major publications want to feature us. But more importantly, he paused, looking around at the assembled staff. We've been reminded of something we may have lost sight of, that our job isn't just to feed people, it's to see them. Chef Thomas stepped forward. Illa trusted her instincts over my plating. In 15 years as head chef, no one had ever questioned my presentations. My ego was bruised for about 30 seconds until I watched what happened next. She was right. The food matters, yes, the technique matters, but the intention behind it matters most. He pulled out a simple white ceramic plate, the same style Layla had used for Rahman's meal. Effective immediately, we're adding an option to our menu. Guests can request any dish served simply. No elaborate garnishes, no architectural plating, just honest food on humble plates. We're calling it the Amina presentation in honor of Mr. Al-Hashimi's mother. A murmur of approval rippled through the staff. Marianne was wiping her eyes. Even the stoic sous chefs looked moved. And Illa, Gerald said, turning to where she stood near the back. Regardless of what you decide about Mr. Al-Hashimi's offer, you'll always have a place here. What you did took courage. This restaurant values that. Later that afternoon, Illa sat in her family's small Queens apartment with her parents and Marcus. The morning news played on mute in the background, showing clips from last night's press conference. Susan had made tea, and David sat in his favorite chair, his recovery evident in the way he could now grip the mug without assistance. So Marcus said, leaning forward with barely contained excitement, "You're actually considering it, moving to help start a culinary school, I don't know," Layla admitted. Rahman Mr. Al-Hashimi said the foundation would be based in Dubai initially, with plans to expand throughout the region. He's offered to relocate the whole family if we want, or structure the role so I could commute back regularly. The salary alone would cover Dad's medical bills, Marcus's tuition, everything. "That's not the real question though, is it?" Susan asked gently. "The real question is what you want, not what we need. What you want." Illa looked at her mother. This woman who'd sacrificed her own dreams to support her family, and felt tears building. "I want to cook. I want to teach. I want to help people discover that food can be more than just sustenance. But I also want to be here for you, for Dad, for Marcus." Miha David said, his words measured but clear. "You've been here for us for 6 years. You gave up your scholarship, your dreams. You worked 2 jobs so we could keep this apartment so Marcus could go to college. We've watched you pour yourself into everyone else. It's time you poured into yourself. But Dad, no buts." He sat down his tea with a slightly shaky but determined hand. "Your mother and I have been talking. We're proud of what you did at that restaurant. Not because it went viral, not because some billionaire noticed, but because you trusted your heart. You saw someone hurting, and you helped them. That's who you are, and whoever you are deserves the chance to become whoever you can be." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Plus Dubai sounds amazing. I could learn Arabic. Mom's always wanted to travel. And Dad, you could get treatment at those fancy international medical centers. You've all been discussing this?" Illa asked, looking around at her family. Susan smiled, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Of course we have. You think we don't see how you light up when you talk about cooking, how you still sketch recipe ideas on napkins during your breaks, how you watch cooking shows like other people watch their favorite sports teams." Her voice grew soft. "Your grandmother? My mother once told me that the greatest gift you can give your children is permission to fly. I'm giving you that permission now, Illa. Fly." Illa's phone rang. Rahman's name appeared on the screen. She looked at her family, saw their encouraging nods, and answered, "Lila." Rahman's voice was warm but professional. "I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. I wanted to discuss next steps, but only if you're ready." She looked around at the tiny apartment, the place where she'd retreated after giving up her dreams, where she'd worked and sacrificed and put everyone else first for 6 years. Then she looked at her family's faces, at the love and pride and permission she saw there. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's talk." 6 months later, Illa stood in a sun-drenched teaching kitchen in Dubai, watching 20 students from across the Middle East and North Africa carefully arrange plates of food. Not elaborate presentations with microgreens and edible gold, but simple, honest dishes served with intention and care. Remember, she said, walking between the stations, you're not just feeding people, you're nourishing them. There's a difference. The Amina Culinary Foundation had opened its doors in March, funded by Rahman's resources, but shaped by the collective vision of people who understood that great cooking was about more than technique. Chef Thomas consulted monthly, helping develop curriculum. Gerald had taken a leave of absence from the Sterling Rose to serve as operations director, and Layla, once a waitress working 2 jobs to support her family, now directed the foundation's culinary education program. Her family had indeed moved to Dubai. David's treatment at an international medical center had improved his mobility significantly. Susan had discovered a love for the city's markets, often bringing back ingredients for Illa to incorporate into lessons. And Marcus was thriving at the American University of Dubai, his Arabic improving daily. But Illa returned to New York every 6 weeks, staying with friends and working shifts at the Sterling Rose. She needed that connection to where it all began, to the moment that had changed everything. The Amina presentation had become one of the restaurant's most requested options. Diners who'd read the story specifically asked for their meals to be served simply on white ceramic plates with fresh herbs. The Sterling Rose had to order hundreds of additional simple plates to meet demand. Gerald reported that guest satisfaction scores had never been higher. People are craving authenticity, he told Illa during her last visit. They're tired of food as performance art. They want to feel cared for, not impressed. The viral moment had sparked a broader conversation in the hospitality industry. Service workers began sharing their own stories of times they'd broken protocol to serve with heart. Restaurants worldwide started rethinking their approach, understanding that the most memorable meals weren't always the most elaborate ones. Rahman had become an unlikely advocate for service worker dignity, using his platform to push for better wages and working conditions across his business empire and beyond. He'd endowed scholarships at culinary schools in 15 countries. He'd funded research into sustainable restaurant models that valued staff welfare alongside profit margins. But perhaps most meaningfully, he'd found peace. The foundation bore his mother's name, honoring her memory, not with monuments or buildings, but with opportunity, the same gift she'd given him decades ago in a small village outside Riyadh. On this particular afternoon, as Layla watched her students present their simple, heartfelt dishes to a panel of guest instructors, her phone buzzed. A message from Rahman, who was visiting one of the foundation's expansion sites in Morocco. Just had lunch at a small cafe in Marrakech. The owner served me tagine on a chipped ceramic plate with fresh mint from her garden. I cried again, but this time they were tears of joy. Thank you for teaching me to see what matters. Illa smiled, typing back, thank you for being willing to learn. She thought about that night at the Sterling Rose, how one instinct, one small act of seeing another person's need had created ripples that spread around the world. How a billionaire's search across 500 restaurants had finally ended, not with perfect cuisine, but with perfect care. How a simple plate of roasted chicken with fresh herbs had healed a grief that luxury could never touch. The students began presenting their dishes. A young woman from Egypt served lentil soup in a plain bowl, garnished only with lemon and parsley. A man from Lebanon offered flatbread and olive oil, arranged with the simplicity his grandmother had taught him. A student from Yemen presented spiced rice on white ceramic, scattered with fresh herbs picked that morning from the foundation's rooftop garden. Each plate told a story. Each presentation was an act of love. This, Illa thought, was what her mother meant when she talked about flying. Not soaring away from what mattered, but rising to meet your purpose. Not leaving behind the people you love, but carrying their lessons forward into the world. She thought of Amina al-Hashimi, a woman she'd never met but whose legacy she now helped preserve. A mother who taught her son that food given with love tastes different than food served with indifference. A woman who would have understood exactly why a simple presentation could mean more than the most elaborate display. And she thought about all the servers, cooks, dishwashers, and hospitality workers around the world who showed up every day seeing the humans behind the orders, caring when it would be easier not to breaking protocol when their hearts told them it was right. You can have the most expensive ingredients, Illa told her students as they finished their presentations. You can master every technique, earn every credential. But none of it matters if you forget the most important ingredient, the intention to nourish not just bodies, but souls. 20 faces looked back at her with understanding. 20 people who'd been given the chance to turn their talent into purpose. 20 more ripples spreading outward from one moment of connection. Sometimes, Illa had learned it takes just one sentence to change a life, one plate of food to heal a heart, one act of seeing someone really seeing them to transform everything. And sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with grand gestures or elaborate plans, but with simple kindness, served with care on a humble white plate. Thank you for reading this story. If it touched you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded that in a world obsessed with spectacle, the simplest gestures often matter most. And remember, whether you're serving food, providing care, or just interacting with another human being, you have the power to see people, to honor their humanity, and to create moments that ripple far beyond what you can imagine. Your voice matters. Your care matters. You matter.